Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Question Time with myself, Harry Knight. Once again, I'm going to be going through some of the questions that you've left for me on previous episodes and doing my best to provide some answers. Our first question this episode comes from Yoga Studio. Well done grabbing that handle on YouTube. Yoga Studio was asking, with reference to what we were talking about last week, where we were talking about fish design boards and Groveler design boards and the overlaps there, whether fish design surfboards are sort of more orientated towards front foot surfing with a lot of the foam up at the front of the board, where maybe a Groveler is more back foot orientated. And we've actually spoken previously about the front foot, back foot kind of fallacy, I guess, that exists in modern surfing, where, with modern boards, it's not really a thing. Front foot and back foot surfing doesn't really exist. You need both feet. I guess there is something to, with a fish, the wide point is forward of center. It's actually only about 3 inches forwards of center on a classic keel fin fish design, so it's not crazy forwards. But what fish do have is these very, very straight outlines, very straight rails, which once they're locked in and engaged, does kind of lend the board towards a more kind of gentle swooping up and down, highline speed run style of surfing. It's going to take more back foot pressure to break that rail out and get the board surfing top to bottom. And it's not that you can't do it. You will see footage of people surfing pretty aggressively. I think Psychic Migrations, there's some great footage of some slightly more aggressive surfing on a very traditional keel fin fish. But I think what is true is that if you are aesthetically drawn towards the look of a keel fin fish, you're probably also aesthetically drawn towards that kind of swooping roller coaster style of surfing over a more aggressive vertical top to bottom style of surfing that a more rounded outline, a more modern shortboard inspired Groveler might lead you towards. So I don't think that definition is particularly defined by the boards. I think either design can be surfed more aggressively off the back foot or with a more swoopy style. But I do think that aesthetically and design wise a little bit, the fish is more drawn towards that swoopy style, and the more modern boards are more designed around the vertical top to bottom surfing. But yeah, hopefully that answers the question. Like I say, I'll put links below to where we were talking more about that front foot, back foot thing. Cool. Well, the next question comes from, and I'm probably going to get this name wrong, but MrXavicasillas. Hopefully I didn't butcher that too badly. He was asking for my opinion on tail pads, front and back, and putting them on fish and on longboards and things like that. So yeah, this is very much my opinion. There's no hard and fast science on tail pads, but what I will say is this: looking at tail pads, first of all, the pad that goes on the back of the board you see generally on sort of performance shortboards. They are really, really useful, and I would hugely encourage you to put one on your board. The reason for it is this: as we're advancing through the tree of knowledge, one of the most common errors that we see is people's feet just not being in the right place, and people standing too far forwards on the board to really get the most out of the surfboard. And again, I think we've spoken about this in a previous episode. Having a tail pad on the back of the board is just the best way to know without looking whether your foot's on it. And if you are going to put a pad on, I would really recommend get one of the ones that's got a kick tail at the back and that actually has a ridge running, they normally call it an arch bar, running the length of the pad. That gives you 3 separate sensory sort of tactile coordinates. You've got, if you can feel the pad but no bump, then it means that you're right at the front of the pad. If you can feel a bump under the arch of your foot, then you're in the middle of the pad. And if you can feel the kick tail up against the side of your foot, you're all the way at the back of the pad. And just moving from the front to the middle to the back of the tail pad will make a huge difference to the maneuverability of the surfboard. So I really recommend putting it on. Obviously, there are a whole bunch of boards where again, from an aesthetic standpoint, we might not want to put a pad on, you know, a really beautiful resin tinted classic fish, single fin, longboard, something like that, where just it doesn't look right putting a pad on. From a technical surf coaching standpoint, I would still recommend it. From the aesthetic standpoint, obviously it's not so good. There are other things you can do. I always recommend if you get hold of a bar of wax, you can just warm it up a little bit in the sun or something, roll it between your hands and sort of create a bit of a sausage of wax and stick that down to the deck of the board, and you'll be able to feel that with your foot, but it won't look too bad aesthetically. But having those tactile coordinates on the board so you can feel that your foot's in position is really, really helpful. With front deck pads, they're having a bit of a resurgence. We had front deck pads kind of came around in the mid-90s and then disappeared again. They're having a bit of a resurgence recently. They definitely have pros and cons. From a pro standpoint, obviously, like deck pads, they're really, really grippy. They're great for that. If you are launching rotational airs and you're landing the board going backwards, having that deck grip in the middle of the board is really helpful. I think for most of us, the traction side of things is a less of a thing, particularly through level 2 and 3 and into level 4. We're not surfing aggressively enough that we necessarily need that traction. It's more about knowing where your feet are. The other actual benefit of a traction pad and a front pad in particular, again, is actually an environmental one. Surfboard wax is a petroleum product. They're oil-based, most of them. And putting a pad on, if you're going to keep the same pad on the board for a few years, actually may be better environmentally. I know there are several pads that are made either from recycled materials or from biomaterials, and there's quite a few companies that are really pushing to make their pads as environmentally friendly as possible, and trying to persuade people to use them from that standpoint. The downside to a front pad, there are two downsides. The first one is the extra grip can sometimes make it difficult to get your front foot in position on the board. It will feel different. It will take a bit of time getting used to it. Those of you that seasonally go from wearing boots to not wearing boots will recognize this. Sometimes when you've got that rubber grip on the bottom of your foot, it's just a little harder finding the right place. And putting a front pad on the board is a little bit like that. Just, sometimes that front foot gets a little stuck on it. The second one is for the sort of the opposite temperature-wise. If you're surfing without a top on, that front pad will really rip your skin to pieces. It's very, very uncomfortable for the first few surfs. If you're surfing in a wetsuit year round, that's obviously not going to be a huge issue for you. If you like the aesthetic, I would definitely think about sticking one on. I think traction is something where in the next couple of years, there are probably going to be some interesting products coming out, people trying to put things on boards to replace the wax, but without losing the aesthetic of a wax surfboard. It's stuff that's a little bit more subtle or translucent. So there are already a few products out on the market actually that do that. I'll put some links to them down below, but again, very much my opinion there, but yeah, I hope it was interesting. All right, last question for this episode comes from Reese, who was asking about pop-up technique and practicing it. But actually, we had quite a few people have been reaching out about pop-ups. Kush Kandawal, Timothy Om 2008. Galush, I think is how I pronounce it. Anyway, all of you guys asked variations on the same theme about pop-up techniques and practicing how to stand up. But Maya's question in particular was, is there a correct technique or a better technique for popping up? And this is a slightly easier question to answer, because no, there isn't. If you watch the best surfers in the world popping up, they all do it differently. There's a great video that I'm going to put a link into down below. There's a guy at one of the Surf Ranch competitions a couple of years ago, and he videoed the best surfers in the world in super slow-mo as they were doing their pop-ups, and every single one of them has a different technique. So whatever works for you, probably the best one to use. There are some, I call them universal truths. There are certain things that have to happen when you're doing a pop-up in order for it to work. And we're all, we all have different shaped bodies. We all have flexibility in different parts of our bodies. And so what you need to do is you need to find a technique that allows you to make these things happen the easiest for you. So let me just run through these really quickly. So number one, you want to keep your head up. Okay, it sounds silly, but we're talking about putting our, moving our feet onto the surfboard, and just subconsciously, your head is going to look down at that. It is the most common thing that we see in video coaching, especially, level 3 and level 4 people that are sending in video for us to analyze. One of the most common things that we see is just people looking down on takeoff, and it just kind of causing problems further down the line. So try to keep that head up. Give yourself a positive target. One of the things that's really difficult is if you just think, keep my head up, that's not very helpful. It's much easier to think, look at the tree, look at the house, look at the power line, whatever it is that's an easy mark. As you push further on, you get to level 3 and level 4, you're still going to have a positive target. It's going to be the lip of the wave further down the line, normally about 10, 20 meters down the line of the wave, at the lip of the wave. That's what you want to be looking at. So there's nothing wrong with learning to have a target. Like I say, at level 1 and level 2, it's probably going to be straight into the beach. Further off, it's going to be that, but keep the head up. The second thing that has to happen is we need to bring the hands back behind the shoulders. It's much easier from if we're just thinking press up, you kind of want the hands about here. It's much easier to push my body up off the board with my hands forwards. There's two problems with it. Number one is it's going to take my weight as I'm lying on the surfboard, my weight's resting down here on my ribs and my stomach. And if I put my hands here and push, I'm going to push the nose of the board down, which can have consequences and problems. The bigger problem is that with my hands here, although it's going to lift my chest and my shoulders off the board, it won't lift my hips off the board, okay? And if I don't lift my hips off the board, it's going to be really difficult for me to bring my legs forwards, okay? As soon as you bring the hands back behind the shoulders, it's going to get better. And if they can come back kind of around the ribs, that's going to be the ideal. We call it having chicken wing elbows. But yeah, so head up, hands back. The next thing that we need to make sure happens is that we're bringing our legs forwards. We're keeping our weight over the front of the board. Like I said, when we're lying down and we're paddling, the weight's kind of resting here on my ribs and my stomach, okay? And what I don't want to do is as I stand up, I don't want to upset the trim of the surfboard. So first thing, I'm going to bring my hands back to about that same point. I'm going to push my arms up. And when I stand up, I'm going to try to bring my legs through and put my front foot basically right between my hands, right level with where my ribs and my stomach was. And when I stand up, I'm going to stand up with all my weight over my front foot. So that in that way, the trim of the board is not affected in any way, shape or form. There's no forwards or backwards rocking of the surfboard. Now, one of the big things that's going to make a big difference here, this is one of the other things that will help, is try to make sure that your arms are all the way straight before you start moving your legs. Okay, one of the things we see all the time is people trying to pop up and their arms will get about halfway and they're already trying to bring their legs through. And obviously, number one, there isn't much of a gap between the board and my body for my legs to fit in. The other problem is I'm trying to support my entire body weight on these two little muscles here. And that's going to be much harder. It's going to put more strain on my shoulders. If we can get the arms locked straight, like lock the elbow in so we're taking the weight on our bones, it's going to be much, much easier to do this big dynamic move, swinging our legs around underneath our body. So head up, arms back, straighten the arms before you move. And then when you do move, let's get the weight all the way forwards. Keep the weight over the front of the surfboard on takeoff. The final thing is this. Slow down. Almost everybody that I speak to about their pop-up, whenever the pop-up is something that they want to change, they always tell me that their pop-up is too slow. They need to pop up faster. And whenever I look at footage of them popping up, almost 100% of the time, the problem that I see is that their pop-up is too fast. Not so much that it's too fast, but they're rushing. they're focusing on doing it faster and faster and faster and faster. And the technique, all those little things we were just talking about, goes out of the window. All right. There's a really good expression they have in the military that I really like, which is slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Okay. If we slow down, if we focus on accuracy, on getting that front foot to land in the right place, that's what we want to do. The speed will come along as a byproduct, but actually most of the time, nobody pops up that slowly, honestly. You've got lots of time. A really good pop-up should look like somebody practicing Tai Chi. It should be these nice, smooth, flowing motions. And you've only got one shot at it. You know, if we muck up that pop-up, we're going to fall in the water and we're not going to get to surf the wave. We're going to have to paddle back out. We're going to have to reposition. You're going to have to wait for another wave. You've only got one shot, so slow down and take your time to make sure that we're landing in the right place, and practice that way on land. You know, there is no substitute for just practicing pop-ups on the land. Make sure that you mark on the floor or on the surfboard somewhere where you want your front foot to land, which is basically going to be where the bottom of your ribs and your stomach are on the board. That's roughly where you want your front foot to land on the surfboard, and then practice that over and over and over and over again. But practice for accuracy, don't practice for speed. So yeah, I hope for all of you guys that were asking about that, I hope that gives you some general pointers. We do actually do, again, like I say, video feedback coaching. And we do video feedback coaching on pop-ups. You know, if you want to video some of your pop-ups, you know, get them on video, even just on land on your phone, and send that through. We can look at that technique and, you know, give you some more specific individual pointers. So if you find that interesting, please get in touch with us. We'd love to help. That is all I have for you this week. I hope that was interesting. I hope I answered some questions that you had, and I hope you will join me again next week. But for now, take care and goodbye.